All right, let's pray together, guys. Lord, we thank you again for your constant love and presence with us. We, especially this night, give you thanks for your healing for Mary Ragland. We pray that you'd be a continued healing presence for Jim and for Jan. We pray, oh God, that you would help not only those people here in this area, but throughout the country, throughout the world that are dealing with this pandemic, to have wisdom and to follow your guidance for healing. Help us now as we study to hear, to listen, to learn, to share, and we will give you the praise and the glory in Christ's name. Amen.
Amen.
All righty. The story continues. One of the things I thought as I was reading and looking at it today is what are the common themes? What are the themes that seem to repeat with Abraham, with Isaac, with Jacob in their stories? What seems to be the common themes that come up?
Haran.
What's that? Haran. Haran was hometown.
The place to be.
Yeah. Yeah. Other themes that
They have to go to get their wives from Bethel, or
they have to go back to Haran in order to find the. It's really interesting that they have to go marry family.
right.
I didn't take the time to sit down and think about it, but it's kind of like, okay, Rachel is the daughter of Jacob's uncle.
Yeah. Laban?
Yeah. Yeah. So it was kind of like, okay, so he's all through the Bible, you have people going back and marrying cousins at this point, through this part of the Bible, I should say.
Is it because they want to keep their line more, I don't know about the word pure, but they don't like the one I'm not going to have him marry a Hittite woman, or, that what's the thinking there? They don't want to mix out into the other tribes or the other peoples.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that there's 2 or 3 possibilities there, Nancy, and it could be all 3 of them, 2 or 3 together. One of them is religious. The Hittite women and Ishmael's daughters and the Canaanites were not monotheists.
Okay.
They were fertility cult people. They were the ones that worshipped the Asherahs and the Baals. It's interesting. If you study Canaanite religion, there was an Asherah, a shrine to Asherah and a shrine to Baal in each of them. And one, Asherah was the female, and Baal was the male. And so they're very much a fertility cult. And so one, it is religion. 2, it is probably the purity of the line. That they're from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They're not from Esau and Ishmael and all of those guys who are lesser than us. And that's for me, that's a hard thing to say, but it's the reality of what was happening at the time. It was a racist decision. Don't marry Hittite women. Well, and the other thing you see is much further on in the Old Testament. You have after the exile of 584, when they come back with Ezra and Nehemiah, and they have married Greeks and Assyrians and people from all over that part of the world, Ezra and Nehemiah say to them, you got to give up your wives and your husbands that are not Israelites, that are not people of Israel, because we got ourselves into trouble when we married other people from other religions and people from other cultures. And that's something that happens, about 570, 565 BC. So it's, it is a pure religion, pure line kind of thing. Other things that you find that was consistent or that repeated itself. One which made me ask the question was God saying, I will give you this land, and I will make your descendants more numerous than the stars in the sky. God makes that promise to Abraham, God makes that promise to Isaac, and God makes that promise to Jacob. And it's that repeating of that covenant that just kind of underlines and highlights as it goes through there. So, other thoughts? Well, what questions did your reading cause you to ask this week?
Marilyn. Okay, can I call you back? Okay.
I don't know about other questions, but it struck me about when the wives are not producing sons, then they give their handmaidens or whatever they're called to have sons for them. And Rachel and Leah, oh my gosh.
Well, and you could tell that they didn't have a modern understanding of reproduction,
No.
because Rachel says to Jacob, "Give me a child, or I'll die." And then she decides, "Here, have a child with my maid." Yeah. That's one of the things is as you look at this, there are so many things that are, from my perspective, that are ancient value systems that we don't necessarily share today.
That was the society at the time.
Yeah, it was. That the woman was supposed to bear a child, and the woman was preferably supposed to bear a male child. And if you didn't accomplish that, then you were considered to be less than what God had created you to be. But yeah, it was the culture of the time, and it was living out of the understanding of the time. Our understanding of science and genetics and so on and so forth, in the grand scheme of history, is relatively new on the stage. That's what's, when you think of, it's relatively new on the stage. You're talking about a few hundred years rather than thousands of years.
And one of the things that, Nancy, I think that we talked about in disciple class was that God's people they were always being chased, and it was really more or less a fight for their survival, with the Egyptians persecuting them and so forth and so on through history. And so what we consider, by our standards today of wrong and having more than one spouse or whatever, it was customary then to populate the earth.
Well, and that was one of the things that God's promise seemed to be for these various individuals, that their descendants would populate the earth. So I guess that was even more reason for them then to have their wives only from certain groups of people, relatives, families, whatever. But on the other hand, they often were told by God, this is your land. So they took land and displaced other people, which that's not very nice. What happened to those people?
It's probably why everybody was after them.
Right.
I mean, were they then were they subjugated to the what would become the Israelis or the Israelites, I mean?
Yep.
What happened to those people? You read that throughout the Bible, that this land will be your land, according to, God saying to that Isaac or Abraham or whoever. And yeah, it's just hard for us to understand because, like you said, it's the context of the times and.
Right.
Well, and one of the things is, let me look it up here real quick. One of the things that's even more outside of our understanding of a civilized world is in the time when the Israelites were taking over Canaan in the time of Moses. The instructions were if you took over a city, you were to leave no one alive.
Yeah. We talked about that in Disciple Bible class too. There was a lot of
smiting going on.
A lot of smiting going on.
Mm-hmm. Well, but of course, over and over again, people didn't do that. They took the women and children as booty from the war, and it it was a lot of smiting going on. That's yeah. And see, that is so outside of our frame of now. Granted, even today, there are settlements built in land that is by tradition Palestinian, but they're Jewish settlements. And the reason that they're building them there is this is our land. God gave us this land. One of the peace settlement pieces for the Israeli-Palestinian talks is the disposition of East Jerusalem. East Jerusalem was a part of Jordan. King Hussein owned the Seven Arches Hotel, which is on the very top of the Mount of Olives and has the multi-million-dollar view looking down into Jerusalem. But the 7-Day War took that area from King Hussein and established it as Israel. And I would be willing to bet everything that I have and everything that I would ever have that will never happen, that East Jerusalem will never go back into Palestinian hands, even though it's vast majority population Palestinian. But East Jerusalem is a unified Jerusalem is critical to the people who are running Israel now and the people who are there. And that's even going on today. So.
And that's more political than religious.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I don't think Benjamin Netanyahu is particularly religious.
No.
Yeah, it is more political than religious. Yeah. All right. Other thoughts?
I was surprised in Israel.
What's that, Jane?
I was surprised in Israel the large number of people who are not Jewish.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they're not Palestinian. They're nothing. We think of Israel as being a Jewish nation, and I guess we think of it, but I was surprised at how many people are not Jewish.
Right. Right.
Do you mean not practicing Jewish religion or
Yes.
not Jewish and national? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know whether you consider Jewish
You broke up on us, Joanne.
A religion or a nationality, I think she was going to say. But.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Frozen.
So, yeah, Israel, and what's interesting in Israel is the one of the smallest groups and one of the most persecuted groups are the Christians. There's a significant number of, it's not a large group, but there's a significant number of Christians that are persecuted by both the Jews and the Palestinian, or by the Islamic people. You know, it's the Christian community is getting smaller and smaller there. So, all right. Any other questions, thoughts, things that came out? All right, let's look at Genesis 28.
I thought it was curious.
Go ahead, Joanne.
I think we're losing her. What's going on here?
I don't know. Joanne,
Yeah.
you fritzed out on us. Please repeat your thought.
I thought it was curious. I couldn't tell whether Jacob went to Haran because Rebekah wanted to protect him from Esau, or because Isaac wanted him to go get a wife. And maybe they were complicit and each had their own reasons.
Yep. I think that's a good observation.
I thought that was interesting, curious.
Yeah. Yeah, they knew they had to get him away from his brother.
Yeah, it says in 27 that verse 41 that Esau, when the period of mourning is over, he plans to kill his brother.
Mm-hmm.
So when Rebekah was told
Right.
what
We have a really poor
Said-
connection tonight.
she told Jacob to flee.
Mhm.
And he goes back home. One of the things, let me see if I can bring it up here. One of the things I tried to find was to give us to give us an idea of the travels of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. Of course, Isaac didn't go many places, but let's see. You know how it is that if something can go wrong, it will at the worst possible minute. I had it open, what I wanted to show you, and then as I went to look for it, I closed it. So, oh well.
Excuse me.
It is that way. But yeah, Haran is up, as we pointed out, is up on the valley, up through the valley of Megiddo and that area, and there's the one. There's the one. Now let me see if I can share it now. Okay. There's the share screen. Can you all see the map there?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. These are the journeys. The red is the journey of Abraham, and Haran is up here. And this is the main thoroughfare from east to west, and it goes through Megiddo and then turns down. And there are two primary thoroughfares, one that goes down the Jordan Valley and one that goes along the sea. This thoroughfare was called the Via Maris, the way of the sea. So Abraham comes down here, goes over into Goshen, and so on and so forth. The purple is Isaac, and as you can see right here, Isaac doesn't go very far. Isaac is in Hebron and Beersheba and so on and so forth. Jacob, on the other hand, flees away from Esau, goes back up here to Haran, where he finds his two wives. And then on his way there, he goes to Bethel. And I'll show you a picture of the Samaritan highlands and Jacob's well here in just a minute. And then he goes up, finds his wife is gone. He is gone from this area here, probably 20 some years. 14 years to get married to both of his wives.
Yeah.
And then he starts having a family. So there's probably 20 some years that he lives in Haran, and then comes back and says, hey, this is my land. So Esau, of course, stays in this area. All right. Any questions at that point?
My book says that it's 550 miles from like Beersheba up to Haran.
Uh-huh.
I mean, it was quite a trip.
It was. And because right there's Damascus, that's up into Syria. The thing that you end up realizing is that Jesus never traveled much more than this area right here. He traveled from Nazareth and the Sea of Galilee to Jerusalem, but Jesus never went up into these areas up in here. So, this is quite a trip. All right, let me stop sharing there for a second and go back to where we were and find my Bible. There it is. All right. Now, one of the things that's interesting, and Nancy, I love your pictures, okay? Because your pictures, I think, introduce some stuff to us, and it introduces how we as people try to process what we have, what we see in the Bible. The thing that's interesting is chapter 28, I believe it is. Yeah, chapter 28 is where Jacob sleeps on the rock. Chapter 32 is where Jacob sees the ladder going up and down into heaven. But your artist who did the picture puts the two together, which once again, find it really, no, excuse me, I made a mistake. Yeah. The wrestling with God is
later.
At Peniel. Yeah. Okay.
So the ladder's in chapter 28.
Yeah. Here's Jacob's. Now this is the story that explains why Bethel is important. If you remember, Bethel translated means house of God. Okay, and almost as we've said before, everywhere you see the word or the letters E-L, that's God. So it's interesting. I think it's 35. The name, the place that Jacob, now Israel, settles as being God, the house of Jacob, of Israel, of God's. It's an interesting. We'll look at it here in a minute. But this is the story that explains the origins of Bethel and why it's important. One of the things that was in the time of Jesus, and you see the arguments happening in the time of Jesus, when Jesus meets the woman at the well, at Jacob's well, and she says, hey, your people say that you're supposed to worship in Jerusalem, and my people say you're supposed to worship at Bethel. The Samaritans believed that Bethel was where the proper temple of God was. And Jesus responds to her by saying, hey, we worship in spirit and in truth, and it really doesn't matter whether it's in Bethel or Jerusalem. What matters is how that we worship in spirit and in truth. But this is the origin of Bethel. Jacob, and one of the things I wanted you to look at verse 18, after he has this dream and realizes that this is, as he says in 17, how awesome is this place? This is none other than the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven. And so he rose early in the morning, and he took the stone that he had put under his head, and he set it up for a pillar and poured oil on the top of it. It is a regular practice of the people of Israel, of the people of God, to build an altar to mark a holy place. And he has a pillar there that marks this as a holy place, and he calls this Bethel, or the house of God.
I thought it was also interesting that the city was formerly referred to as Luz, and Luz in Spanish means light.
Uh-huh.
I don't know if there's what that has to do with anything, but I just noted that.
Yeah.
I read it.
Yeah. Now the other thing that this is a story of origins as well, the ancient Israelites tithed. You know, Jesus gets into an argument with the Pharisees when he says, hey, you tithe mint and dill and cumin and then neglect the weightier matters of the law, like justice and peace. But this is the origins, one of the origin scriptures of tithing, where Jacob says, if God will be with me and will keep me in this way that I go, and will give me bread to eat and clothing to wear, so that I come again to my father's house in peace, then the Lord shall be my God, and this stone which I have set up for a pillar shall be God's house. And of all that you give me, I surely give 1/10 to you. So this is another one of the ancient scriptures that teaches the practice of tithing. Okay.
My book made the distinction here that he didn't build an altar.
Okay.
Because, and like you just said, if you do this, God, then I will.
Mm-hmm.
And he didn't build an altar yet. All he did was put up a rock and pour oil on it, because he wasn't fully accepting God yet. He doesn't do that until he wrestles.
Until he wrestles. Okay. Interesting. Okay. So, all right. He's off to, he's running. He's getting away from Esau. Now we come to Rachel. Now, the first 15 verses, it talks about how Jacob meets Rachel. Now this is what's interesting. Somebody had speculated in one of the commentaries I read that Jacob was a very large man, a very strong man. And this is one of the passages that they say about this, because it says, if you look at verse 2, it says, end of verse 2, beginning of verse 3, said, the stone on the well's mouth was large, and when all flocks were gathered there, the shepherds would roll the stone from the mouth of the well and water the sheep, and then put the stone back in its place. And the implication here is that it takes more than one man to move the rock. But what happens is, in verse 9, or verse 10, now when Jacob saw Rachel, the daughter of his mother's brother Laban, and the sheep of his mother's brother Laban, Jacob went up and rolled the stone from the well's mouth and watered the flock of his mother's brother Laban. He moves the stone by himself. So one of the commentaries that I had read said that this had led to a speculation or a tradition that Jacob was a very large, strong man. I have no idea about that. I just found it interesting that he does it all by himself. Any other thoughts? Now, another commentary I read today said that the practice of working for 7 years so that your payment is one of the daughters as your wife, that was a relatively common practice in the ancient world. That it happened, that still in some cultures, especially the Bedouin cultures, it happens yet today. But You know, now thinking about it, how is it that that Jacob got the wrong wife on when they brought Leah into him? How is it? How can you pull that off?
Well, it said in the Bible that she may have been veiled, or it said in my notes, I guess, and she was brought to him. She was brought to the bridal chamber, so presumably it might have been evening or night.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Laban tricked him just
Right.
like he tricked his
Sure.
brother.
He's
Yeah,
the
but-
deceiver, and now he was deceived.
Yeah, the trickster got tricked.
Yeah.
Uh-huh. And you know, that just seems to happen over and over again, both ways. You know, Laban tricks Jacob, and Jacob says, "Okay, that's fine. I'll work another 7 years." So he works another 7 years, and he gets the wife that he really wanted, the one that he loved, and and you know how occasionally they'll tell you the translation of a person's name. When I was preparing today, I looked through the name Leah, translated in Hebrew, means wild cow.
Oh dear.
And since I have 3 Leahs in the church, I'm going to immediately forget this.
And the notes in my Bible say that Rachel translates into you, as in EWE.
Right.
And then it said those are appropriate names for a herdsman family.
It would be. That's the thing that for me, I have to continue to remind myself is we're talking about Bedouins here. We're talking what we would see being modern day Bedouins. These are people who constantly on the move, who are hurt. You know, they're not running a cow farm. You know, they're Bedouins. So.
But my Bible doesn't say anything about mad cow, just cow.
Yeah, wild cow.
Oh, wild cow. Okay.
That's right. That's right. Wild cow is what they said to translate. So,
Oh my gosh.
now,
Oh, heavens.
and now they start having a family. Verse 31, the very first son that is given is Reuben, and it says that translated Reuben means sea, a son. When in the ancient world, if you or in the Hebrew language, if you see Ben or Bar, it means son of or a son. Bartimaeus, the blind beggar sitting at the gate waiting on Jesus to enter, he is the son of Timaeus, Bartimaeus. And that was his name. Reuben it says see, a son. And what's interesting is how each of these names means something. One of the and I didn't try to unpack it today, but one of the commentaries I read today, the guy was talking about how this particular text was probably written in a time when the 12 tribes were in place, and they were describing each of the tribes by the names that were given. The political nature of the time of that the scripture would have been written is that the northern 10 tribes and the southern 2 tribes, which would have been Benjamin and Joseph, were at odds with each other. And hence what you had, and this is, if you go into the Old Testament a little further, the northern tribes that have their own king, as do the southern tribes, much further on. And the Assyrians defeat the northern tribes and send them into exile. That happened about 732 BC. The southern tribes continued to exist in their own, with their own king until about 584 BC, when the Babylonians defeated them and sent them into exile. So you really did have you had two kingdoms, one in the north, one in the south, both of them claiming to be the true heirs of Abraham. And they didn't always get along. There were only 3 kings of a united Israel. Anybody know who the 3 were? It's not a hard guess, really. Who were the 3 kings of a united Israel?
I would say one was David.
One was David.
Solomon.
Solomon was the other.
Mhm.
And if you go one before David, Saul.
Saul.
Yeah. Those are the only 3 kings of a united Israel. After Solomon, Rehoboam and Jeroboam both say, "No, I'm the king," and they divide. And you have a divided kingdom from Solomon on, and that's so. This is being written, and if you see things in here where one might be casting shade toward another in the writing, it's out of that reality of what was going on at the time, of the political realities of the time. So
what year did you say that was?
The first exile, the defeat of the northern kingdom, was 732 BC or somewhere in there. The defeat of the southern kingdom and the final exile of Israel was 584 BC.
I thought you were giving the date of the separation.
Golly, that would be Solomon, and I'd have to look that up.
Okay.
Solomon was the last king of the unified Israel. Now, you can see when people talk about the coming of the Messiah, what the hope of the people of Israel was that Jesus, or whoever the Messiah was going to be, would come and would be King David and would bring together the United Kingdom again, and it would be powerful because they were powerful in that time. And hence the interesting kinds of things that can happen when you see political. There were people, and I believe there were people even in the disciples who believed that Jesus was going to start a revolution. I think that's why Judas did what he did. Mm-hmm. I'm not one of these people that thinks that Judas was just born to betray Jesus. I think Judas really believed Jesus was the Messiah. He just thought he was a military Messiah and that he needed to push him. And by pushing him, then he would do what he was supposed to do, and that is bring the armies together and throw the Romans out. Mm-hmm. So I'm much more gracious to Judas at that point. And the reason for that is his reaction. When Jesus doesn't do what he hoped Jesus would do, he's distraught. So that's just, and that's me. That's not only me, but I believe that's what I believe about Judas.
Well, they portrayed that in Jesus Christ Superstar.
They did.
Yeah.
All right. Rachel, chapter 30, verse 1 says, give me children, or I shall die. And then he starts having kids. Now, I wanted to bring to your attention verse 14 of chapter 30. In the days of wheat harvest, Reuben went out and found mandrakes in the field. Now, I don't know what your translation says. What does your translation say instead of mandrakes, or does it say mandrakes?
It says mandrakes.
That's mandrake.
This is a mandrake. Do you know what a mandrake is? I did.
Plant which was believed to produce fertility and were used as love charms.
Yep.
It's some kind of a plant.
Yep. It looks like a potato.
Root.
Thought it was a duck.
It looks like a potato, and you're right, Jan. It is renowned for its fertility, and hence Rachel is saying to Leah, "Please give me some of your son's mandrakes." You know, I can't have kids any other way. Maybe this will help.
You know, my
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
they resemble the lower part of the human body.
Yeah.
Uh-huh. When I looked it up today, it says that they're a nightshade. Okay, and for me, that I didn't know what that was until a few years ago. And basically, a nightshade is in the potato family and stuff like that. But yeah, they do resemble the lower part of the human body.
My book calls it love fruit.
Oh.
Oh, there we go.
It has unusual properties, the book says.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I do. You know how it is. We can read Bible for decades, and then we run across something that we go, "Well, gee, I don't remember that being there. What's that?" And that I had that experience in looking at a mandrake. Okay.
Yeah, it says when they were eaten, and that it was thought to induce pregnancy. So
Right.
you had to eat the plant, the roots or whatever part of it. I don't know, but anyway.
Yeah.
So she thought by using some sort of magical means, she might be able to become pregnant.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
But it's interesting that Reuben brought it to her. Maybe she sent him to get it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, actually, Reuben brought him to his mother. Brought him to Leah.
He brought him to Leah.
Oh, to Leah, that's
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
Oh, and then, so Rachel says, please give me some.
Yeah. Roughly translated, she says, "Where'd you get those?" So.
Well, all through this, Leah is hoping that by bearing sons, that her husband will come to love her as much as he does his second wife.
Yep.
Second wife being Rachel, of course. And Rachel strikes a bargain with Leah, and she says, "If you'll give me the mandrakes, you can sleep with Jacob tonight."
Yep.
So.
And lo and behold, they get a Issachar. You know.
It's interesting. It's kind of ironic, the relation of the firstborn here as compared with the firstborn situation with Esau and Jacob. I mean, Leah was firstborn, so she was the entitled one.
Yeah. Well, and as we get into the story next week of the 12, you will see that Joseph gets, as we all know, Joseph gets special treatment because he is the firstborn of the preferred wife.
But not the firstborn of the first wife.
That's right. He would
Not
not.
the firstborn of the first wife.
That's
Yeah,
right.
see that connection, that firstborn business is interesting throughout the whole thing.
Absolutely.
But yet Leah would have been held in honor. She would have had the honorable position of not only being the first wife, but the fact that she bore so many sons.
Uh-huh.
And still that didn't
Right.
make Jacob love her
Yeah.
as much as he did Rachel. So
One of the things that I think is kind of interesting is the description of Leah. The description is earlier on, it says she had weary eyes.
oh yeah.
I wonder what that, the commentaries I was writing was saying that she had some kind of vision problems. But she was not only the wife that he didn't want, she also didn't look right. She had weary eyes. So.
Well, and also she was unable to literally see the fact that she was never going to be able to take Rachel's place in
Right.
Jacob's heart.
Right.
And that would be the connection too, that she didn't grasp the reality of her current situation.
My Bible says Leah's eyes were delicate.
Okay. We're delicate.
Delicate.
Okay.
Delicate.
Okay.
But Rachel was beautiful of form and appearance.
Yeah.
This is me, and I've hung around enough teenagers in my lifetime to hear one teenager saying to another, "Well, you know, you got pretty eyes." You got a really nice personality.
Oh boy.
You know, it's that kind of Leah just what Rachel was just the preferred one. But you're right. What's interesting is Reuben does not get the firstborn son treatment. You know, you're right, Joanne. That's an interesting thing. All right. Jacob and Laban, this is one of those to see who can get who. You know, Laban says, "Okay, I owe you for all your years of work. What do you want in addition to my daughters as your wives?" And he said, "Well, why don't you just give me all the imperfect sheep and goats? Okay, any of them that have spots, I'll take. And if you find a perfectly pure one, that was yours and it got stolen." And then there is this story of Laban saying, "Good deal." And he goes and gets all the spotted sheep and goats and stuff like that, gives them to his men and said, "Take them 3 days away so that Jacob can't get them." And then Jacob, once again, this is not modern genetics. Jacob says, "Here, guys, look at these rods of wood, and they'll make you spotted and striped." And they did. So it's one of poplar and almond and plain, and peeled white streaks in them, exposing the white of the rods. Now that's verse 37. So basically, Jacob takes all of the healthy sheep and goats from Laban because they were impure according to his deal with his father-in-law. All right. Any other stuff? We're getting, golly, it's 7:53. We got to get over to chapter 32 here before we get done. But Jacob takes his family, his kids, his wives, his sheep and goats and camels and everything else, and he takes off. And Rachel steals one of the home gods. One of the great stories, as Laban catches him and says, "Hey, look, you stole one of my gods." And Jacob says, "Well, whoever you find has it, I'll kill him." You know, Rachel has it. But when they come into her tent looking for it, she says, "You know, I'm in that way as women are, so I can't stand."
Yeah.
She's sitting on the god that they couldn't find it. And Laban and Jacob depart and they go back. Now, 32 is.
But why did she steal it in the first place?
She might have considered it her inheritance.
Okay.
Yep. She might have. Well, and it might also show that she wasn't 100% monotheistic. You know, that
Right.
having home gods was a practice of the time.
Yeah, I'm not sure Jacob is either at this point.
No. Chapter 32, verse 22 is when we have Jacob at wrestling with God, and he gets his name changed. He takes everything that's his and he sends them on ahead of the crossing at the ford of the Jabbok. And he took them and sent them across the stream, and likewise everything he had. Jacob was left alone, and he wrestled with him until daybreak. one of the great questions to ask here is, have you ever wrestled with God about anything, about something? Because all of us have at some point, you know. Jacob gets his name changed here, verse 28. And then the man said, you shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel. For you have striven with God and with humans and have prevailed. Interesting. I thought last week when we got done with this, I thought, you know, these stories really do have the ancient faith wrapped in them, and they don't try to hide the fact that God uses imperfect people all the time.
And he had a real problem with Jacob.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Oh, I want to show you a picture. Let me do this real quick. I want to show you a picture of, see if I can get there. Hold on. Now, hold on. Let me. This is Samaritan Highlands. This is not too far from Bethel. And I took it from the bus. As you can see, the mirrors is reflecting stuff. This is the church at Jacob's Well. Very ornate Orthodox church, the iconostasis, the Holy of Holies, but behind which only the priest can go. That's Jim there. Another one of the iconostasis, the icon walls. And down to the well. And there's Joanne at the well, getting ready to, they allowed you to take a sip of the water. They said the water was still clean and cold. I passed on that one. But you know, this is the well. And of course, if any place is holy in Israel, they have built a church on it or built something on it, so that it's marked as a holy place. And you see the icon back here of Jesus and the woman at the well, at Jacob's Well. So just wanted to show you a little. There's a picture of the well and the communal cup that you that you could drink from. So
I bet they're not doing that now.
yeah, I bet. You know, I saw a thing today. They were interviewing a guy who is one of the shopkeepers in Jerusalem, and they're in crisis. You know, there's nobody there. Nobody's coming, and understandably. But you know, when you make your living selling, tourism is the #2 industry in Israel. I didn't realize what #1 was until many years ago when I first went on my first trip. #1 is diamonds. And there's not a single diamond mine within thousands of miles of Jerusalem. But the Israelis are masters at cutting diamonds. And they do it for industry, and they do it for jewelry, and it brings in even more money, or it did the first time I was there, more money than tourism. So it's an interesting place. Any thoughts? Anything you want to add before we're done? Because it's 8 o'clock. Any questions? Well, guys, thank you. I hope that these have been worthwhile. We're going to continue to do them a few more. We go through the end of July, and then I've taken a couple of weeks off, and then we'll be looking at what our studies look like in the fall. Well, guys, keep each other in prayer. It's good to see you. We'll see you again. See you again next Thursday.
All right.
Bye.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody.